Well, welcome everyone to this IES panel discussion. My name's Joseph, I'm policy lead at the IES, and I'll be hosting today's discussion. Science has historically played a key role in the curation of knowledge and understandings about the world, and particularly in conversations around the environment. And if you're attending today, you probably already know that climate change and environmental challenges have brought the perspectives of younger generations to the fore, as well as the consideration of how future generations will be affected by decisions. These perspectives offer a unique lens on environmental challenges, where many of the effects of decisions now will continue to be relevant long into the future. Today's panel discussion is part of the IES's 2024 policy work on the theme of knowledge, addressing practical and theoretical questions about what evidence-informed policy means in practice. The goal of the discussion is to highlight the importance of young voices and the perspective of future generations as we consider our approach to the environment. We've had a very timely and exciting example of that in the last couple of weeks with the conclusion of the UN Summit of the Future in New York, which led to the adoption of the Pact for the Future, Global Digital Compact, and Declaration on Future Generations. As always with international summits and pacts, we will have to see how that plays out in practice, but it is an exciting reminder of the importance of these conversations and the role that they can play at every level, from the local to the global. Today's event will begin with presentations from a selection of speakers, all of whom have perspectives on either the power of young voices or a future generation's perspective. I'll give you a quick rundown of what to expect now, but I'll also introduce each speaker properly when I call them up to speak. First, we're going to hear from Andy Oroke, an environmental consultant and PhD researcher in environmental engineering at Newcastle University. Next, we'll hopefully hear from George Carew-Jones, who is a director of the UK Youth Climate Coalition and research associate at Oxford University's Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment. Andy and George are going to provide perspectives from environmental science and youth engagement, talking about some of the work that they've done in this space and potentially giving us a sense of how environmental science and young voices can productively interact. Then we're going to hear from Sandy Clubb, who leads on engagement at the Wellbeing of Future Generation Commissioners team in Wales. Sandy, perhaps unsurprisingly, will give us a real look into that future generation's perspective, what it looks like in practice, and how valuable it can be. And then finally, we'll hear from Joshua Beynon, who wears many hats, but will be talking, I think, primarily about some of the work he's been involved with as a member of Pembrokeshire County Council, where he's currently the Cabinet Member for Finance and Efficiencies. Those short presentations will set us up for a short panel discussion and an opportunity for questions from the audience. You can ask those questions into the Q&A throughout today's event, and I'll put them to the speakers directly a little bit later on. And if you have any more general comments, feel free to add those in the chat box throughout, which we'll be enabling as we get started. The discussion will be recorded, and some of it may subsequently be made available through the IES YouTube channel. So thank you for logging in, and I'm now going to hand over to our panel of speakers, starting with Andy. Andy Oroke is an award-winning environmental specialist and a PhD researcher in environmental engineering at Newcastle University. Through his interdisciplinary PhD research project, Advancing Technology for Removal of Arsenic, which is of course also known as the King of Poison, in groundwater, he's contributing to addressing water quality issues in a way that is critical to achieving water security, a sustainable environment, and public health. Perhaps most importantly, Andy's a member of the IES, where he also serves in our External Policy Advisory Committee, contributing to offering expert advice on IES environmental policy mandates and issues. Andy says he's passionate about science as an evidence-based tool for effective decision and policy making. So Andy, over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. So today my talk is going to actually focus on two key aspects, which I've termed here as why we should prioritize young voices in environmental decision-making processes, and also different strategies that could be used to ensure effective engagement of young voices in decision-making processes. So usually, when I want to tell this story, one thing that comes to my mind is the experience I had when I was, growing up in a kind of community where there are lots of crude oil, so lots of different companies mining crude oil and also doing like mining exploration, which contaminates the environment, starting from the water, the food, and also the air we breathe. So in most occasions, when people want to, or when maybe government or even the companies want like engage this community, or maybe try to engage people in that area. Basically, they focus on the community leaders and usually leave the young people. And actually, this is part of the story that it kind of informed my decision to pursue undergraduate degree in environmental science, because I mean it was all obvious. You could see the oil exploration contaminating the water, the food, and in most cases, we the young people are always the highly disadvantaged and also much more vulnerable. But when it comes to like engaging the community to solve this problem, we are always forgotten. So, and along my my degree pursuing in environmental studies, I also come to see that that young people also have answers to most of the biggest world problem, including also that in this age where technology are at the center of problem solving, young people are also critical stakeholders to that. So that is how I come to kind of shape my career across this area to contribute in solving this problem that's facing not just my community but globally. So after my bachelor's, I was looking for a way to contribute to at least making my voice heard, especially in the aspect of youth engagement in policy that has to do with the environment. So that is how I went to volunteer with an active youth climate organization where we basically focus on advocacy and also trying to draw government attention to how they can impact, especially local people like maybe the women, to help them to adapt to climate change. So from there, I had the passion to advance my knowledge. I proceeded to study environmental management masters, and also again went to work with some industry as environmental consultants for some years. And I was really keen and happy because I can see that now I could make some few impacts um, to make sure that this environmental issue is being appropriately addressed. So, but there was one thing that was always in my mind. I was looking for how can so after my master's, I saw that that scientists or science play a key role in influencing the decisions that they make across this broad area of climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss, and so many others. So that is actually how the passion to do a PhD come in. So I was like, if I do a PhD, for example, I could be able to use my knowledge based on science to help decision makers to integrate different aspects of solutions, especially young people. My major focus is always young people, and that is how I came to a kind of from this experience. I came to a kind of a strategy that I think could be useful uh, when um, when you're talking about young people and environmental decision making. And one of them is, or maybe the summary of it is that young people in general need, or the young voices need to be empowered and also connected. And three key ways that the young voices could be heard is, first of all, they need to be empowered, and this could take the form of maybe relevant education. For example, they need to actually know what the issue is about. And also, they also need like a platform where they can showcase their knowledge, their potentials, where they can also air their voices, their opinion, and where they can also help to talk about these environmental issues, because it's really concerned them a lot. And again, one of the most important aspects, which is also always not incorporated, is the connection part, because for there to be a sort of policy or law that appropriately articulates the issue of young people, they need to also be able to partner or work with these people who make these laws. So that is where I think, for example, decision-making organizations or governments should kind of develop or look for a way to come up with a novel approach to ensure that the young people are effectively engaged and connected so as to give them the platform and the opportunity to bring out their different novel solutions, their ideas, because I mean, they have the ideas, they have the power, they have the ambition, they have the drive, but one thing that is lacking most times is they need to be appropriately connected and engaged. And this is why, even as I'm doing my PhD, I really have a kind of very strong desires to helping to influence the inclusivity of young people in making decisions that has to do with environmental issues, simply because they are among the highly disadvantaged and yet forgotten. Yeah, so this is where I will want to stop my talk.
Amazing. Thank you, Andy. That was a great presentation. I think it was really interesting to hear the parallel between your own career journey and the critical sort of role that young voices can play as stakeholders. And I really like that practical element of the presentation, sort of the ways that young voices can be empowered in an effective way and the very clear benefits of doing so in the context of these interlinked environmental issues. So our next speaker is George Carew-Jones. George is a research associate at Oxford University's Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment, the SSEE. He works on the FCDO-funded Climate Compatible Growth Programme, focusing on climate finance and the environmental decision-making in developing economies. George holds an MSc in Nature, Society and Environmental Governance, or NSEG, from the University of Oxford, and has a background in youth-led climate activism, being a director of the UK Youth Climate Coalition. This voluntary work involves attending UNFCCC organised conferences to lobby for progressive climate policy. So, George, over to you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for the kind introduction. First of all, thanks to IES for the invite today. As mentioned, I'm a director here at the UK Youth Climate Coalition, and I wanted to give a bit of an introduction today about what we do and how we work to try and empower young people in the UK. As Andy's spoken about already, it's very important for young people to have the opportunity to have their voice heard, and that's exactly what we work on, to try and provide those opportunities. So as a bit of an introduction as to who we are, so the UK Youth Climate Coalition was set up in 2008 by two friends who were young people from the UK who'd been on an Arctic expedition. And when they were there, they were talking about how difficult it is for young people to get access to particularly international policymakers when it comes to things like, at the time, the UN climate conferences were becoming more important. And they originally wanted to create a group that would basically fundraise to allow people from the UK who otherwise wouldn't be able to attend these conferences to have the chance to go and to engage with policymakers. And since then, the group has grown a lot over time. So we're now, I guess, nearly, well, we just had our 15-year anniversary last year. So we're getting towards the point of being, I guess, a late teenager ourselves. But the group is 18 to 30-year-olds. There's about 100 of us, and it's an entirely volunteer-led organization. So our mission is about mobilizing and empowering young people to take positive action, specifically around this concept of climate justice. So thinking more than just climate policy, but also how can we create like a just approach to addressing the issue of climate change that takes account of intergenerational injustice and also global injustices. And we have this vision for a just and sustainable world where both current generations and future generations can enjoy and protect kind of a healthy environment in a holistic sense. So we want to focus a lot on accessibility. That's why we do quite a lot of work as an organization fundraising to make this movement accessible in a way that are not, isn't always particularly to people from kind of working class backgrounds or people from bits of the UK that are less represented by universities or businesses that are acting in this area and giving people a chance to engage. We also have a kind of influence approach. So we have a campaign that I'll come and talk about in a bit. And we also focus quite a lot on the idea of care and support. So we know that a lot of young people have climate anxiety and are looking for an outlet to address that sense of anxiety. And so we do quite a lot of work on welfare to try and create a space that they can be themselves, but also share their fears and their thoughts, and kind of generally work together for like greater well-being within that movement. So there's a few pictures here I've got on the slides. One on the bottom left is us at a team weekend. So the way that we work is that we have people from all over the UK. We're represented in all 4 nations, so Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England. And we tend to meet on Zoom together, which is why it's a bit ironic that it took me so long to to get involved on Zoom today. But we meet up usually 3 or 4 times a year in person in somewhere in the UK, where the whole group will come together. We'll do a series of workshops over a weekend where we advance our work and kind of build on that, I guess, mission that I was talking about in the slide before. And the way that we organize ourselves is across 6 specific working groups. So we maintain that working group that engages in international policy making, attending the COPs each year. So myself and I guess 7 other people from UKYCC will be going to Azerbaijan in November to attend the COP29 conference there to lobby for policy change. And we also have a kind of UK focused policy group. We have a group that focuses on community education and community engagement, one that's looking more at systems change and how we can design new systems. So they've looked a lot at things like how meals are prepared in schools. They've looked at things about like how we treat economic growth, or the concept of economic growth in the UK. And then finally, we have a communications and operations group. So the other pictures I've got down here are the middle one is a sign from a protest that we did in COP28 in Dubai, which was quite an interesting one because it's quite a difficult place to be a climate activist in Dubai, because in the UAE it's you're not allowed to I guess engage in activism publicly. And then the bottom right is a picture from our 15th year anniversary conference that we held at the end of last year that was in Stratford in London. So I guess in terms of the relevance to IES, we have a number of members who are university students or who are engaged in like jobs around climate, or those who are not but want to have their voice heard more in science, policy and evidence in particular. And I think generally it's quite hard for young people to engage in things like, say it's I don't know, like DEFRA put out some kind of like call for feedback on a policy change they want to implement. You will get all of the like big environmental NGOs responding to that. You'll get universities and businesses responding, but it's very hard for young people to organize, especially individually, to say like put in a response to that consultation. And that's the kind of thing that we, I guess, see the benefit of collective action towards. And you know, I'd be really interested to hear if anyone on the webinar today has thoughts about how IES as an organization might want to engage more with existing groups in the UK, like UKYCC, that have, I guess, that convening power to be able to do that. Because quite often we, I guess, one of the biggest barriers that we have is in identifying opportunities, and you know, like it takes a lot of time sometimes to respond to specific opportunities and coordinate people towards doing that, particularly in the kind of science and policy worlds, which can be quite hard to navigate for people that have less experience. That's kind of where we see ourselves, like kind of being the facilitator between those more traditional existing organizations and a kind of diverse group of young people that want to get involved. So just to finish off, I want to tell you a bit of a story about a campaign that we've been running, just to give you an idea of like what the work we do actually looks like. So for the last few years, we've been working on this international campaign that we call the Conflict of Interest campaign, which is basically about trying to point out and address conflicts of interest within policymaking, particularly fossil fuel interests in, I guess, climate policy. So this is a sign we brought over to Dubai, which says you would not see tobacco at a health conference because the World Health Organization has a specific policy on excluding tobacco companies within health conferences now, so you can't have private sector interests represented within the UN framework for prevention of tobacco, and that's not the case within the UN framework on climate change. So that's something that we've been kind of looking at in terms of, we did some research on the number of fossil fuel lobbyists that are present at the COP conferences each year. We did quite a lot of engagement with the UK government on what a kind of conflicts of interest policy would look like, kind of lobbying on governments to try and pick that up as something that they're leading on, generally like raising awareness of this issue. And you might have seen there was quite a lot of press on this point around the Dubai conference last year. So a number of our members were kind of talking on BBC Radio and stuff about that. And that's something that we're going to try and take forward to continue this year. So again, if you've got any specific interest in that campaign, then do contact me and let me know, and I can put you in contact with the rest of the team. But yeah, that's just a quick example of the kind of work we do.
Amazing. Thank you, George, for your great presentation and for that story about the campaign at the end. As always, it's interesting to hear about the work that the UK YTC is doing, as well as how that mission helps to give young people a voice through collective action. And I think that climate context is a really great example of where both youth empowerment and climate justice considerations are very important, and also where they have the power to make a significant impact on policy making. Our next speaker is Sandy Clubb. Sandy leads on engagement at the Wellbeing of Future Generation Commissioners team, bringing the together in the team's vision to life. She's the main point of contact for the voluntary and community sector within that team. As an engagement practitioner and advisor, Sandy has over 15 years experience with organisations ranging from the National Trust, Sustrans Cymru, or Cymru if you're in the north of Wales, Valleys to Coast Housing, and Cardiff Council. The common thread in all of Sandy's work has been listening to and involving others to enable collaboration and co-production. Sandy says that her love of getting to know communities, landscapes, and the things that connect them has helped her learn Welsh to fluency and taken her to wild and interesting places all over Cymru. So Sandy, over to you.
So yeah, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to speak today. So I'm Sandy Clubb, as Joseph said, and I work with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Commissioner here in Wales. So I'm going to be chatting a little bit about the legislative context for how we work with future generations in Wales, and then a little bit about the involvement work that we do. So we're really fortunate in Wales to be the first country in the world that has legislated for the well-being of future generations. We did this back in 2015, at which point we embedded the Sustainable Development Goals into law. So we're about to mark that 10-year anniversary next year. And this is a quote that we have used a lot in presentations over the years from the UN, sort of saying, you know, what Wales is doing today, we hope the world will do tomorrow. And so, as Joseph mentioned earlier, we're really delighted that the UN actually has now made that declaration and the global pact for future generations. And that's something we've been working a lot on an international stage to kind of share what Wales is doing. So really, really positive news for this approach globally. So here in Wales, what we've done with this legislation is that it set out a vision for the world we want to see in 2050 that we've framed around our 7 wellbeing goals that were co-created by people in Wales, and really was about thinking, you know, what future do we want our children and our children's children to inherit? So people, of course, wanted, you know, a world in which we have a prosperous but low carbon economy, where we have vibrant, thriving ecosystems, where we can we're healthy and we have an equal society. We can move about easily within cohesive communities, but where we have a vibrant culture and Welsh language as well, and that we're achieving all of this whilst reducing the impact that we have on other countries and our kind of global responsibility goal. So in terms of why this is important, the figure on the right represents sort of the balance between the generations. So the grey dot at the top represents people who have existed before and are now dead. The green dot is people who are alive today, and that massive orange circle represents unborn generations still to come. And this is based on UN population forecasts. So the importance of thinking about that responsibility to people who aren't yet here, it's really important that it helps us fight short-termism in the policies we make, and firefighting, getting out of that kind of just firefighting current problems in order to really tackle the impacts, for instance, of some of the big environmental crises we face and the impact that will have on future generations. It also helps us address the democratic deficit of not always hearing those voices of future generations and younger voices. It helps us future-proof, and through all of that, to hopefully, I'm sure what we're all here and as IES members to do is leave the world better than we found it. So in terms of how organisations in Wales do this, and there are more than 60 different statutory public sector organisations now covered by the legislation, that balancing of the needs of the present with the needs of the future, they do it through 5 key ways of working that they have to follow, which is sort of the recipe for sustainable development, if you like, of that act. So they need to work in a preventative way. We must collaborate. We must involve the public, and that includes young people and their voices in decision making. We must look to the long term in our planning, and also work in an integrated way across different policies. So that might mean, for instance, how when we're looking at reducing something like air pollution from transport, how that can impact on both the environment but also people's health. And in doing all of this approach really helps us lift our heads, I think, in policy making, and that different perspective, because we're looking beyond the here and now. So in terms of how we can do this in a practical way in policy making and thinking of future generations' approaches, one is to adopt what we call a sort of deep time humility. And so for me, this is that moment when I'm like looking up at the stars and kind of thinking that, wow, how small we are in terms of the cosmos, or that eye blinking cosmic time. We can also adopt what's called a legacy mindset, and this is often also described as wanting to make sure that we're being good ancestors. And if you haven't already, I would really recommend How to Be a Good Ancestor by Roman Kusnarek, who it's like an introduction into this type of thinking around future generations. So holistic forecasting is another method that we often use in this kind of futures-based way of doing policy. And so this is a really nice thing that you can do in involvement with people of any age, but especially with young people. There are lots of games that you can use that enable the kind of building of different scenarios about the future, depending on what policy levers you pull. Another metaphor for future generations thinking is cathedral thinking. So this is about that sense of projects that exist beyond the scope of a human lifetime. I had a lovely conversation with a Welsh farmer recently who was saying that this is really kind of embedded in the culture of Welsh agriculture, and that people would have planted a tree in order for their grandchildren to build a barn. And so I think that's one way we can reflect that thinking of future generations isn't a new sense. Often it's about rediscovering cultural ways of approaching something. And that connects really closely with the next thing on this, is thinking about intergenerational justice and considering the seventh generation ahead. And this is very common within Indigenous cultures, to do exactly that, and to think about the effect that actions will have on the seventh generation. And we owe an awful lot within future generations' work to Indigenous peoples and cultures. It's important that we continue to create that link for intergenerational justice. And then lastly, thinking in terms of transcendent goals. So it might be, as an environmental scientist, maybe you are studying how to re-establish seagrass in Pembrokeshire. But how does that link with the wider kind of planetary goal of well-being and tackling some of these big problems we face? That can be really important for this. I've put a link there, the website to the Inner Development Goals, if you're interested to find out more about how we can. I think that sense of a transcendent goal links very much into the inner development that we need to do as individuals and also organizations in order to achieve sustainable development. So that's there if you'd like to find out a little bit more about that. So in terms of our work in the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner, we do a lot of work with young people. For instance, the big picture there in the middle is our Future Generations Leadership Academy. I think we'll hear from an alumni next, Dr. Beynon. So this is a program that we do with sort of early career leaders in Wales to embed that sustainable development approach. We're really aware, as George mentioned, of how prevalent climate and eco-anxiety is in young people. And the groups that we've worked with, the thing that they've said, again, echoing both of our previous speakers really, is around how the thing that really helps ease that anxiety is being engaged and having agency to influence decision making.
We're getting a very strange audio lag. Perhaps, Sandy, we'll put a pin in that for now, and then we might come back to you in a moment if we can sort out the tech issues. If we can't get back to you, thank you, Sandy. I think it was an excellent presentation, as much of it as we've managed to get through. I think it was great to hear in particular how that vision has followed through into very practical realisation across Wales through the goals and those sort of ways of working. But hopefully some of those issues like deep time humility, legacy mindsets and holistic forecasting are things which can be adopted by attendees on the call today as well. For now, finally, our last speaker is Josh Beynon, as indicated. Josh has a background in local government, healthcare and communications. Based in Pembrokeshire and Wales, he's led strategic initiatives across sectors, focusing on sustainability, governance and health outcomes. Josh has managed complex projects, including developing Pembrokeshire's first net zero action plan and overseeing a greener primary care action plan. Josh says he has a passion for languages, music and triathlons, which mirrors his commitment to continuous learning and personal growth. So Josh, over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. So, hello, everyone. I won't keep you too long because I know there's a couple of questions and we need to get to them as a panel. So my name's Josh. I've been a member of Pembrokeshire County Council since May 2017. So I was elected when I was 19 years old. I was the youngest in the country at the time, and I was really passionate about making a difference. And then I got elected, and then I had the walls and barriers of every system that you can imagine come right in my face, which made things very, very difficult. So I wanted to find a way of kind of getting through this and working with people to try and achieve change and try and influence policy and try and make sure that we left behind a better generation. So the photo there of me on the right is actually as a member of the pilot leadership program with the Future Generations Commissioner. So it ties on very nicely from Sandy's presentation, and learnt the skills in that essentially on how to kind of move forward. So what I wanted to do was try and prove that in politics or in communities, you can make a difference. And quite a significant difference, not just in the small stuff that you think your local council does from, collecting bins, but actually the resources and the big stuff behind it. So, we're a county council with 120,000 people in Pembrokeshire, and we've got a budget of about 300 million. So we've got a real opportunity to make a difference. So I thought, what's the best way to get a difference when we're faced with probably 40, 50 councillors that are over the age of 60 that I think are fair to say are reluctant to change. So I thought the best way to do that would be to go to communities. So did a lot of work with schools, which is, you can see there during the COVID years as well. That's a flashback for you. A lot of work with community groups that maybe have allotments, community groups that do litter picks. Everything that would start off small, that wouldn't reach the big stuff, but to use that to put pressure to see actually how we can make a difference when it comes to the big plan. So worked together with all these community groups. One by one, we worked with every single councillor to try and find out what their interest was, or maybe what were the concerns in their community that we could maybe replicate, or what was already happening somewhere else. And it wasn't really a real science behind it. It was a lot of time, a lot of communication, but essentially just connecting the dots between A and B all the way to Z. And actually translating that into real change. So we managed to get council to agree a net zero carbon action plan by 2030, which is really positive because 2050 tends to be the usual government goal of where we are when it comes to action plans, and it's not some kind of easy light touch plan. We're looking at everything from our planning system, our highways, our procurement, which is a massive thing as well, but also turn it into a positive. So instead of buying a cheaper produce from somewhere else and adding carbon miles, we're doing that more locally, but we're also supporting the local economy. So we're trying to find real positives and saying to people that actually, being net zero, doing something positive for the environment can not just have environmental benefits, it can provide social benefits, economic benefits, and tying all into that. We've got some really, really exciting projects now coming up. We've turned a lot of our car parks into solar canopies. We are going to be one of the free ports in Wales in terms of tax sites, and we have a lot of renewable energy companies now based here, with some major developments in some of our dockyards. And we've also got a long-term hydrogen energy project as well, working with the Milford Haven Energy Cluster. So there's some really big doors opening as a result of the noises that we made around 5 years ago now in being able to change this. And, a key pillar to that is that number 3, that community engagement, that awareness in working with people around what they want, and getting that buy-in from people was so instrumental in getting that buy-in from councillors, from getting that buy-in from Welsh Government, from getting that buy-in from Westminster, in terms of actually linking everything up. It sometimes feels like it should be a given and we should be doing these things, but actually that doesn't always materialize. It doesn't always happen. I've taken a clip of a newspaper there, actually, of me, actually, and I couldn't squish it down anymore, but from when we reached the action plan. So I've listed some of the things that we did. Transport's a key part of that, and I'm not saying we've got everything right, but we're definitely moving in the right direction to meeting that 2030 target at the moment. Obviously, the harder part is how we do that in a rural area as well, because our nearest city, which would be Swansea, is an hour and 15-minute drive away, or 2.5 hours on the train. Or Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales, is a 2-hour drive away, or a 4-hour journey on the train. So actually, people do need to show that in rural areas, we can still achieve some of these things. We might not be able to achieve some of the things like 20-minute neighbourhoods, or some of the things that actually maybe government's promoted in places like London, when you've got, pedestrian streets, etc. But what can we do with the geography that we've got and the resources that we've got locally? So it was really positive. This is tied into my interests as well. I did an economics degree when I was at university, but did a master's in environmental management, and particularly focused on Wales as a nation with recycling as well and the circular economy. Pembrokeshire's actually got the joint highest with Swansea now in the whole of the UK for recycling. We recycled 72% of household products. So we're just doing little things and getting buy-in from people along the way. It's not the most popular thing at the time, which is another kind of warning that I would give, that not everything's popular, but taking that time to build relationships was so important. Every single household now has about 6 bins, which sounds like an absolute nightmare, but people separate it at source and you get higher quality stuff. So just explaining to people why we do things and why we work that way has been really great for us. Obviously want to touch upon youth involvement as well. When we did that, we set up some youth advisory panels. Obviously, I'm a young person, and people would come back and say to me, "Oh, we've got you involved. You're a young guy. You can represent the youth voice." But that's quite tokenistic. You know, I was there in the role as a councillor. We need people who are invested in communities. So we did that with using existing networks, but also setting up new ones. But also that educational awareness. We've done a lot around climate awareness in schools and communities. Again, this probably links very closely to what Sandy was talking about, but actually that long-term aim of people that are coming forward to make sure that we don't have a disengaged population, that people actually understand why and how things affect them as well. And this has been a really successful part. You know, hearing, you know, from an expert about what we needed to do was important, but hearing from people that live and breathe some of this stuff is really important, and especially in a coastal area. You know, I'll give an example. We've got a Newgale Beach. Some of you might have heard of it or been there. That road regularly floods, so communities living down there are quite rightly anxious, as they are in places in the north of our county, like Fishguard. So having those people talk about those anxieties, what they're living, what they're breathing, was really, really vital to kind of making sure that we were as ambitious as we could be and trying to change things as well. And obviously that youth engagement we still do now as well, even though we've got the plan, to make sure that we are essentially held accountable as well. And there's no formal powers to them, because obviously that's why you've got those structures, but just to have those conversations and to work with people, it really has made our lives much, much easier. So conclusion, because I know we've only got about 10 minutes left after this, is just around that political action. I think is really important, and that really lower community action as well in getting people involved. I couldn't recommend it strong enough in being able to actually deliver change. And, you know, hopefully this is a model that people will pick up and you hear about it more and more in the future. But, you know, a real success story here in Pembrokeshire, which hopefully we can keep growing on into the future. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Josh, for what was a great presentation. I think it's a really useful practical example of an action plan and how you can make progress on some of these issues in a positive and inclusive way. And I think you also did a great job of championing the role of community engagement and buy-in as a key part of making changes happen. Now we've heard from all our speakers, we will be bringing the whole panel back in to answer some of your questions in a very quick Q&A. So first question that's coming through, and this isn't directed to anyone in particular, but we'll maybe pick out in the first instance, George. How can we make engagement with environmental science appealing to younger generations? I think we'd maybe also take Josh's point on this. How can we make engagement appealing in a way that is more than tokenistic? How can we encourage positive engagement from both sides? So we'll maybe start with George, and then maybe we'll go to Josh, and then possibly Andy, depending on how much time we've got.
Great. No, it's a great question. I think, I mean, environmental science, it's like there's always going to be some people that love it, right? That are like super keen and have always wanted to be involved. And like, I've been watching David Attenborough since they were 5, whatever. But there's also going to be a bunch of other people that like feel like they want to do something, but there needs to be like a bit more of a bridge and storytelling, basically, to get them involved. And that's why I think, like, in some respects, you need to make it fun, and that's a lot of what UKYCC is about, is bringing like young people together in a group that's organized by young people. So you kind of have that peer-to-peer thing. And we found that has been quite effective in getting people involved and staying involved that otherwise potentially would have been put off a little bit by things that maybe seem a little bit more top-down. And so I guess that's something that kind of like we try and offer. But at the same time, we totally rely on things like what Josh has put forward and what Sandy's talked about that are a bit more like institutional, to kind of allow there to be that two-way directional approach.
Thanks, George. And Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I definitely agree about the fun point. we've done quite a lot of work, when I said about schools, with outdoor schools and, going to the beach and forest. And we're obviously very lucky to have that on our doorstep. But been really great to give people kind of real, tangible examples of environmental science in action to then spark that interest. And obviously we live in the UK, we get wet weather. So we've also tried to do a lot with technology as well, which I think is really important. We did invest in some VR goggles as well to kind of show some examples, which has actually been really great as well. So not just for young people, for actually adults, even just rocking up outside a Tesco or an Asda and just, giving people that immersion has been really great. So I think I would just totally agree with George that making it fun is definitely the best way to bring about those changes.
Brilliant, thanks, Josh. Andy, I've actually got a question that's just popped into the chat for you, which it sort of draws the line between consultancy in the environment and younger generations. So I think your expertise might be particularly interesting. So an anonymous attendee asks, what advice do you have for when decision makers in a private company, such as a transport operator, when they distrust younger generations' voices only because of their age rather than based on objective counter arguments? How can you overcome those sorts of barriers? I don't know, Andy, it's a difficult question, Andy, but I don't know if you have an answer for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to approach it, from a kind of real practical projects that we did where when it was time for environmental impact assessment of a project that was proposed by a certain company. So they were kind of different actors, and sometimes it can be quite difficult to harmonize these interests from the politics part, the economic perspective, and also from the other relevant stakeholders. For example, the young people from the community, including the other community people. So it's usually a very kind of complex issue that sometimes, we in doing our job, we kind of try to offer an advice saying that, for example, although you might like to do this, but you have to do this in the right way, because if you do it this way, for example, it helps to show the public that your company is environmentally friendly, and it also build that trust. So it's just I could summarize here by saying that in terms of effectively engaging young people in order not to leave their voice unheard, especially when doing that kind of projects, is really, really complex. However, it's not left for both the practitioners to insist that the right thing is done, and to make sure that despite the pressures coming from different aspects of the projects, that the right procedure is followed.
No, basically, I think that's a great answer, Andy. And I think your presentation has some really good examples actually of the kind of positive case you can make around that. Sandy, I've got a question here for you. I think it's a great question, but it might be a bit of a tricky one. What's something that you know now that you never would have thought of if you hadn't taken a future generation's perspective? So what's something that emerged for you solely from that thinking?
That is a tricky question. Who put that one in? Something that I know now that would never have occurred to me. I think one of the times that futures thinking has changed my perspective the most has been when we played in a game format around thinking of different scenarios that were linked to the topic was basically around demographic change. And this was in groups with young people, and we had to write you had basic prompt cards with different policies on of things that governments might do to tackle the challenge of falling birth rates and an aging population. And then we had to write newspaper articles set in the future of what we thought was going to happen. And it was just mind-blowing in terms of following those strands and the policies and the different ideas that young people came up with as to some of the solutions they come up with for reversing that demographic change. But then also some of the pitfalls and the kind of apocalyptic scenarios that they had thought of that we might not have done. So I think for me, that was one of the best examples in action of using these techniques to think differently about a future trend.
Amazing, thank you, Sandy. I suppose as a sort of follow-up to that question, George, you said UK YCC is at COP. What are you asking for, and how can It's as we, perhaps those in the broader environmental science community, amplify any asks that you might be making.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. We talk about like three R's. So we ask for responsibility, which is basically that's just like a big term for like more proactive climate policy, right? So like things like wording around fossil fuels and agreements at COP, like that only for the first time last year, which is pretty crazy to think about. We also talk about representation, so like making sure the right people are there. And there's still a lot of work to be done to like balance the attendees in terms of having particularly frontline communities represented. And that, I mean, when we talk about frontline communities, people don't always think about the UK, for example, but there are plenty of people in Pembrokeshire, for example, who are living in coastal environments that are like under threat from climate change. And it's the same, you know, all over the UK coast, but then people are having their lives affected generally. So representation is one. The last thing is slightly more controversial with reparations. So we talk about like people like countries like the UK recognizing the historical responsibility we have to solve climate change because we benefited most from emitting. So that's kind of our asks. And then in terms of you know, how the environmental science community can help, I mean, evidence is super crucial. And I see someone's put a question in the Q&A about what advice do you have for when decision makers of a private company say distrust young generations purely based on age rather than objective counter arguments. And like, it's quite useful for young people to be able to go into, say, like meetings we have with politicians or businesses or whatever, like with evidence of being able to say, like, we've actually read this paper, I don't know if you've read it, and it says this and it supports our argument rather than yours. So that's one thing. But then also, like, you know, education is super important for young people to skill up, and that's another thing that environmental scientists can do a lot of. So yeah, there's a lot of university-based outreach stuff. I think Oxford is doing a youth climate training program at the moment. It's been really useful.
Amazing, thank you, George. There are other questions that I would love to ask them, but we really don't have the time now. We are at the end of our time. But for now, I'm afraid that is all that we have time for. Thank you so much for all of those questions. For now, though, thank you again to all of you for attending, participating, and sharing your views and questions. But thank you especially to Andy, George, Sandy, and Josh for setting us up so well by sharing your expertise and for such great panel discussion. For now, that's it from us for today. So thank you to everyone for logging in and participating. I hope you found it beneficial and informative. If you're an IES member, don't forget to record your attendance at this webinar in our CPD tool by logging into the IES members area. And as I've said, this discussion has been recorded. Most of it will be made available on the IES website and YouTube channel. If you are watching the recording on YouTube in the future, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it with your friends or colleagues. And if you've enjoyed today's webinar, please do consider joining the IES as a member if you're not already. For now, though, thank you again to Andy, to George, to Sandy, and to Josh. And thank you, everybody, for attending and taking part. Hopefully, we'll see you again soon.